It's vital when studying horary astrology to know the difference between applying and separating aspects. Now, this is something that modern astrology largely ignores, but it's important in pretty much all forms of classical astrology. So rather than talk too much about it, although I'll give you the formal definitions, we're going to examine this chart of the US inauguration for 2021 in order to see how the applying and separating aspects work. Now, the first thing you have to do when you're looking at applying and separating aspects is know that each of the bodies, the lights and the planets, has a different average speed. Now, when we do average speed, the fastest body is the moon, and then that's followed by Mercury is the next fastest, then Venus, then the sun, okay, noticing how we talk about the sun here, then Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, there are exceptions to this, and one of the exceptions has to do with retrograde, but what I want to show you is the basic plan of how this works. So now many computer programs, this happens to be Solar Fire, gives you the option to look at what's called the travel time. Now, this is the easy, cheap way to tell how fast a body moves. And there are obviously times when a planet is getting near to slowing down, where its speed decreases. But we want to look at this in the general case here. And so let's start up here with the sun, which is always a good place to start in this chart. We have the sun at 0 Aquarius. And so we can, now, the way that you tell whether an aspect is applying or separating is, first you have to figure out which of the two bodies is moving faster. Now, the sun never goes retrograde, so that's no issue. And Saturn can't get anywhere near the average speed of the sun, which is close to a degree per day. So we know that only the sun is the faster moving body. Now, what you're now looking for is whether the faster moving body is at a lower degree than the slower moving body. So here it is. And so the sun is said to apply to the conjunction of Saturn. In other words, if I were to step this chart, you would see the next day the sun would be at about 1:51 at this time, the next day 2:51 at this time. So about 3 days later, the sun is going to catch up to Saturn. So that's an approaching conjunction. Now, similarly, Jupiter is a little faster than Saturn, but nowhere near the speed of the sun. So after the sun comes to Saturn, it will then come to Jupiter. So those are two applying aspects. So faster moving body to slower moving body. Now, on average, Mercury moves faster than the sun. I'm not going to give you the way that you learn how to tell approximately the speed of a planet like Mercury, but for now I can say also you can just quickly look over at the travel, and you see the travel time of the sun is 1 degree 1 minute. The travel time of Mercury is 1 degree 19. That tells you that Mercury is moving faster, and since the slower moving body is behind the faster moving body in zodiacal degree, Mercury is separating from the sun. So if you looked back a while, you would have seen Mercury coming up like this, coming to the sun, and then going past it. So Mercury is separating from the sun. It's separating from Saturn. It's separating from Jupiter. These are all in the form of conjunctions. Okay. Now, if I look at the moon, there's another case. So here's the moon. It's a 29 Aries. My little chart down here says moon votive course, which is true in the modern systems, but I'm not going to get into that in this lecture either. What's happening with the moon is it is just about to go into Taurus. When it gets into Taurus, it will then come to Mars and then come to Uranus. And so we can say here that the moon is applying to Mars and Uranus. Well, what else is going on in this chart? Well, the moon moves faster than everybody. So when the moon gets into Taurus, the moon is also squaring the sun. It's also squaring Saturn. It's also squaring Jupiter. So those are applying aspects of the moon to those three bodies. So we have Mercury separating because it's a higher number. We can also say here that Mercury is separating from the aspects of Mars and Uranus, whereas the moon is applying, when it gets into Taurus, to the square of Mercury. Okay, well, what about Venus? Okay, well, we have Venus here, and it's at 15 Capricorn. So it is separating from Mars and the Uranus, because those are both slower moving bodies. And so Venus is at the higher degree, so it's separating from having earlier trined them. And so we see that aspect with Venus. And meanwhile, Venus at 15 Capricorn is applying to Pluto. So what you need to know is the general speed of the planet, because you always look from the faster body to the slower body. Is the faster body at a lower degree coming up to the slower body and then it's applying, or is the faster moving body at a higher degree than the slower moving body, and then it's said to separate?